recording. We're live on Facebook. We're live on LinkedIn, and we're going live. Randy, you ready, buddy?
I am very ready. Let's go.
Cool. Hey, I'm Teddy Burriss. I'm a LinkedIn strategist, trainer, and coach. The company I work for was led by my wife, who keeps me in check, is Burriss Consulting. I love to help people use LinkedIn as a business tool. To my buddy, Mr. Randy Wood, and I, 42 weeks ago, let me get the exact number. We're at week, boom, 42 weeks ago. We started this lunch conversations with Randy and Teddy, and absolutely had fun doing it. And I'm glad everybody showed up today, and glad Randy found Stan to bring Stan into the conversations. Randy, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself to the fine people?
Sure. 42 weeks ago. Wow. That's amazing. You think about it, this whole COVID thing now, we've, in another month or two, we'll have been a whole year in confinement for a lot of us. So it's, man, it's flew by. What you got?
Hey, remember this. We've got to put together our anniversary show.
Yeah. So we're going to have to noodle that a little bit and figure out what we're going to do. But again, Randy Wooden, I work for Goodwill Industries of Northwest North Carolina and run our professional center. So as you might imagine, I help professionals who are either out of work looking or maybe proactively kind of seeing what's out there. We're totally free. We're happy to help. And among the many services we provide are group events. Well, unfortunately, you're not going to show up at a group event. But I'll tell you what, this show that I do with Teddy kind of serves as that. We get a good turnout. We're happy to help job hunters. So reach out to me, find me on LinkedIn. And I'm happy to introduce today's special guest, Stan Kimmer. And actually, Stan, December, I guess it was?
Yes.
I'm involved in a professional organization, Society for Human Resource Management. And Stan was our December chapter meetings presenter.
Yep.
Talking about diversity, inclusion, equity, and such. And such a very interesting topic. And I'll turn it back to Stan, and then we'll kind of get things started. But I got to tell you, Stan, I've sat through a number of diversity talks, seminars, webinars over the years, and yours was the very first one that, as a white male, older white male, conservative white male, whatever demographic tag you want to throw on me, that I didn't feel like the finger was pointing at me as the source of the world's problems. And I think when you look at diversity, it's a big pool out there, and it's not somebody's fault so much. And the way you presented it just spoke to me. And I said, this guy, if we can get this guy on the show, I think it'll really be impactful. So Stan, take it away. Tell us a little bit more about you, and then let's begin to dive in on the why behind why you do what you do.
Okay.
Hey, Stan, before you get started, hey, folks, I'm going to be monitoring chat. So if Stan hits you with something that makes you think, or he hits you with something that brings a question up, drop the questions in chat and I'll queue them up for Stan. Stan, back to you, sir.
Okay, so yeah, thanks for that great introduction, because I always like to think of diversity as a positive topic, that we should be talking about what is the value of diversity, and that the diversity discussion involves all of us together. It should never be a we versus them type of discussion, and that even, white men are a valuable part of the diversity mix and the diversity equation. And we also had to realize that, white men, that we are all very different and unique and diverse from each other too. So a little bit about me. I had a 31-year career at IBM, and I worked in almost every function. I worked in sales, field support, marketing, brand management, finance, sales operations. But the most fun I had was 4 years when I was IBM's gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender diversity manager. So when I retired from IBM and decided to start my own company, I thought, what was the thing that I enjoyed the most at IBM and that I was the most passionate about? And that was the diversity work. Because I feel that if you're really passionate and excited about what you're doing, you're really going to enjoy it and do a great job at it.
Yeah, so that's the why, I guess. It's just something that you grew to love as an employee, and now you're doing it on your own. Before we dive into a lot of the different topics surrounding our discussion today, let me ask you this. Could you define the terms? So we've all heard of diversity. Many of us may not know the difference between equity and inclusion. So for today's discussion, let's define those terms so we're
Okay,
all starting in the same spot here.
great. Yeah, diversity is basically all those characteristics that make each individual and each group different from each other. And it can include immutable characteristics like your race, your gender, your age. It can include your personalities, your way of thinking, your personality type. It could also include decisions that you made along your life, your political leanings, whether you got married or not, whether you had children or not. That's all part of your diversity mix. Then inclusion takes it one step further and says, not only do we need to realize that there's diversity there, but we need to take actions and create an environment where everybody feels welcomed and accepted and respected and valued, and that everyone's going to want to fully participate in whatever activity or organization that you have going. And then two things to talk about are, equality and equity and the difference between those two. Equality is one of those great American values, the equal worth of all people, and that we are all created equal. But equality recognizes that people have different amounts of resources and started at different places in their life. And that equity means that sometimes you need to treat people differently and give them tools or processes so that they have an equal opportunity to compete. An example would be if you have a blind employee, to treat that person equitably means that you might buy them special computer equipment with a very, very large monitor or equipment that converts words on a screen to voice so that that person can do a great job and compete equally with everybody else. You don't have to treat everybody equally. Every single person doesn't need that same special computer equipment. So equity is that recognition that you need to supply different people with different tools so that they can excel equally.
Yeah, and I remember reading somewhere online or something about, because it's online, it's got to be true. Stan, you know that, right? But something about diversity, meaning inviting a bunch of different people to the dance, but inclusion is inviting them to actually dance with you. It is, versus, okay, fine, you're in the party, but just go sit over there and don't, mess with us.
Right.
But it's a way to engage with people too.
Yeah. I actually use that sometimes in doing diversity training. I use that saying, that diversity is being invited to the party, and then inclusion is being asked to dance. And I even show a photograph of a woman who uses a wheelchair, participating in a dance and dancing to show that, everybody can dance.
Hey, just want to remind everybody, if you have a question or a comment for Stan, Dr. Teddy Burriss, he's not a doctor, but he plays one on TV. He's happy to.
I have a blood pressure cuff. Does that make me?
I have a stethoscope, but I don't know how to spell it. So, so I flunked out of med school. All right. So Stan, let's get started here on this topic of diversity and such. This thing's grown a lot, and it wasn't necessarily just George Floyd and that, but this has been growing for years. So kind of get us up to date, I guess, on where things stand now or how this has grown in importance over the last year or so.
Yeah, actually, I'd say over the last 30 years, because, when people talked about diversity, it used to be, people of color and women, or gender and race. But now it's expanded to include generational diversity and how the different generations communicate, gay, lesbian, transgender people. It includes veterans. It includes cognitive diversity of the way different people think. But the most important thing to look at is demographics. That if you look at where we're headed by 2040 or 2042, we're going to be a minority majority country. So the Hispanic, the Black, and the Asian population taken together will be greater than the white people living in the United States. So organizations and companies and governments need to be thinking, what does this mean for our future talent? What are our future employees going to look like? And what's the talent pool going to look like? And what are our customers going to look like in the future? If we're going to grow and thrive, we have to realize that the face of our customers and clients, or for a government, the face of our citizens is going to be changing. And we have to be able to be in a good position to deal with that.
Now, some of the topic, of course, this is an organic conversation, and it can drift and meander as we feel it needs to. But I know two topics for those that are watching that we definitely want to get to today. One is if you're a job hunter,
Oh
because
yeah.
about half of our audience are in the job search, about half aren't. They're all professionals, but if you're a job hunter, and if diversity, equity, inclusion, if those topics are impactful for you and important and part of your decision-making process in terms of where you might like to go to work, what are some cues that you can look for from the company to see that they actually walk their talk? And on the flip side, if you're an employee
Yep.
or you're a hiring manager and you say that you value diversity and so forth, what are some things that you can say or do or avoid doing or saying during that hiring process to show or demonstrate to the job hunter that you do walk the talk? So those are two things that we're going to cover, along with some more. And Stan, feel free to jump in where you want to here. But again, we're seeing a whole lot more of this diversity training. Are you seeing any difference, I guess, in the acceptance or the realization that, okay, this is awkward, but we got to have these talks?
What I'm seeing is that business leaders are really understanding that diversity now is like a central core topic for it's strategic for a company or an organization or a nonprofit to succeed. That it's not about, it's something that we kind of do on the side, but it's totally integrated through an entire corporate strategy. That, diversity impacts how do we do recruiting and bring in talent. And so, company executives have to look at, are we looking at the widest possible talent pool to bring people in? And then when we bring all these diverse people in, how do we make sure they can work together well, that everybody feels welcomed and included? And then, how can we then leverage different people in the way they think to come up with better products, better solutions, or better services? And then finally, selling and marketing, that, a diverse sales force or customer service representative area can serve better, can serve diverse clientele better. And so now executives and managers are realizing that diversity is integrated into all these different parts of a business, and it is indeed strategic. And so it's imperative. People are realizing we need to focus on it.
So it's more, you're getting more buy-in from the people who write the checks and seeing this as a business decision, that it makes sense from a profit and loss standpoint, not just from an ethical, moral standpoint and a human
Absolutely.
standpoint. Yeah. Teddy, you had a question,
yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and Stan, I see this often, that I think that when an organization, when the team in the organization respects each other. Cindy asked a question: how does manners play a role in this whole area of respect? I see that when a team respects, a diverse team respects each other sincerely, openly, then that just seems to cascade all the way out to everybody else that they touch. What do you think?
That's a very important point, because I talk often about teamwork and diversity. There are several surveys out there, and they ask people what relationships are the most important that help you determine if you're going to either stay in a job or perhaps leave. And it's not what the senior executives are saying. It's not what the HR team is saying or doing. It's how are my coworkers treating me? That's the most important set of relationships that make people either feel excited and happy about coming into work, or feeling unhappy and it becomes drudgery and they become disengaged and they're basically working at about 50% of their capacity. So that, creating a good teamwork where everybody learns how to respect the diversity of everybody on the team, and then even value the diversity. That it's not just, hey, you're diverse and I accept that you're here, but as someone who's different from me, what can I learn from you? And what insight can you bring to the team that will make the team output greater?
Something that I think you mentioned at the meeting in December. So to the degree you want to comment on it, great. But it dealt with the financial impact. productivity is increased when people feel engaged and part of the team. Do you have any numbers to back that up off top of your head, ballpark? I mean, how we talk, this is a right thing to do and it's important to do, but can you put any meat on the bones here with in terms of dollars and productivity increase?
And actually, the productivity increase, that's a little bit harder to qualify, because how can you measure, oh, Randy's 5% or Teddy's 10% more, productive this month. So you can that one you kind of have to guess. The one that you can really put dollars behind is reducing your attrition rate. That if people feel like they belong and they do not leave, the cost of recruiting and onboarding a new employee can range from 75 to 125% of salary. So like if you have 100 people and you can keep like 3 of them, from leaving because they now feel like they belong, that can be like a $200,000 savings, in recruiting and onboarding cost. And that's a really big one that you can, prove financially. And you can hopefully show over time that as you do very good diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and good diversity training, and people start feeling more included, that you can reduce that unwanted attrition.
Yeah,
it's important.
Huge cost to corporations. Have to replace employees. Not only the actual measurable dollar cost, but if you lose an employee because they don't feel welcome in your environment, then, Stan, you may know this stat better than I do, that, 70% of the negative noise will get amplified 100% of the time.
Yeah.
So that's horrible. It's real.
It is. Now there's a question. Cindy had posed a question in here. Has Stan ever been part of a discussion of diverse coworkers where they open up about what offends them personally due to ethnicity, religion, or how they were raised?
Yeah, and that's a tough situation. And one point is to always start from a point of positivity, that we should not be about being negative, judging, or demonizing people because we were raised that this group of people are wrong or this type of people are bad. So we always have to say, let's all be positive about how we treat others. You want to be treated with respect and positively, so you should do the same for others. And then a lot of workplace training that's successful is getting people that are dissimilar from each other just to have discussions and talk. Sitting in a Zoom chat together or sitting in a physical room together and getting to know each other as people. Because a lot of times when we demonize others, it's that group out there. We've never talked to them. We don't know somebody who's personally in that group. And once you get to dialogue and talk with someone, you see that, hey, we have humanity in common. We're both people with feelings, with families, with hobbies, and just having that kind of interaction between diverse people in the workplace can really help push that forward.
So there's a story about a business leader in a city that I have been in, and I'm not going to tell you the individuals' names because they asked me not to share their names. But here's this young African-American business professional. He goes to a networking event. At the networking event, he is invited to sit at the table with this older, sort of retired looking white guy. He sits down beside this person and asks him his name. And then he remembers who this guy is. He is, in fact, and I'm going to use my words, not someone else's words, he is the retired Grand Poobah of the KKK. So here's this young African-American professional who sits down with this retired KKK leader. Many would assume negative. Many would assume that the young African-American guy got up and walked away.
No,
Not what happened. These two started talking, and they clearly understood their differences, but they discovered their similarities. To the extent that a few times afterwards, they got together and had lunch. That is, I picture that as a way to overcome diversity. Now that's my blunt words is a very blunt style of diversity. These are two people who have hugely different perspectives in life, but they overcame those to discover their similarities.
Yep.
Most people
Great.
wouldn't do that.
An example, and that's the kind of thing that can have, it might not be as extreme an example, but when you bring diverse coworkers together and just to sit down and get to know each other as people. And then other good thing about work is even if people are diverse and have diverse feelings or opinions, that any work group should always coalesce and agree on the mission, vision, and goals of a company. If you're working for a company, I might be very different from you, and I might have a very different working style from you, and I might even approach an issue differently than you. But the one thing we should be able to agree on is this is the stated mission of our organization and our stated goals, and we're all working toward that.
We're gonna get to the two topics. If I'm a job hunter, what do I look for? And if I'm a company,
I'm ready.
Got another question that sort of popped up, and I'm just paraphrasing here. Again, looking for definitions. If how would you define the difference between biases and stereotypes? Are those different?
They are they're different but related. And there's an important topic around unconscious bias. We all have bias, and bias is basically the quick thinking that comes out of our brain based on everything we've experienced all of our lives. It's sort of our brain automatically triggers in some thoughts when we when we see someone for the first time, or we meet someone for the first time or hear something, our mind triggers a thought. And it could be because of all the things that have accumulated in our lives and what's built up of our innate knowledge. And I'll give you a little example of that. Then stereotype is actually kind of taking that a step further. And when these biases kind of coalesce into a thought of, because we've had this experience with some people, we now stereotype that all people of this certain group act and think a certain way. And we kind of let that say that, oh, if this person is, if this person is Black, they're going to act and do this instead of looking at them as individuals. And how I introduce bias is I tell the story, that a father and his son were driving and got into a very serious car accident. And the father was killed. And the boy was rushed to the hospital. And the surgeon came in and said, I can't operate on him. He's my son. And how can this be? And people kind of puzzle over this riddle because they assume the surgeon is probably a man. How can the person have two fathers? The surgeon was his mother.
I remember that.
Right.
That was from All in the Family. Archie Bunker said that back in All in the Family, back in the 70s. Yeah. That was actually, I remember that line because when I heard that, I was just a kid and I go, well, I hadn't really thought of that. I remember that.
So, we have stereotypes, you stare, and actually careers, you think, the stereotype, you say airline pilot, you think older white man, librarian, you automatically think older white woman. Janitor, you might think of African-American or Hispanic person. So we have these, these stereotypes that, and these biases that kind of just trigger in our mind, immediately when we think of a profession or see somebody.
Absolutely.
Chan will take offense to that statement of the librarian. And I'm just joking, but Chan is on here and he's a librarian and he's not a she, and he's not old.
Yeah, and actually when I do my unconscious bias training, what I do is I show pictures of other people in careers, and I show a young Black male librarian, and I show a female airline pilot, and I show a female Hispanic business executive, and so it's fun to show, people who are kind of atypical for what people think about who should be in what career.
And that fits what Patricia threw out, that there's so much stereotype typing going on, and across all aspects of business and life and job search.
Oh yeah.
And Patricia threw out the common one that you know, that people think all Hispanics are Mexican. That's not the case. So this whole stereotyping thing will often present us with foot deeply inserted in mouth.
And that's yeah, because I've written several blogs, and one of them is you know, 7 stereotypes of Hispanic people, and that's one. You know, that Hispanics are very diverse among themselves. There's many different countries in Central and South America, and they each have their own unique cultures, and they're all very different, and they're unique from each other. And then I wrote, you know, 7 stereotypes of LGBTQ people, 7 stereotypes of Muslims, kind of a whole series.
Yeah.
You know, where people assume, you know, certain things about groups of people, and we need to realize that we need to bust these stereotypes and look at people as individuals.
And I'm guessing, Stan, real quick, Randy, one more point, that I can find those articles on your website.
Right. If you go to, yep, totalengagementconsulting.com.
Got it. Yeah.
Yep. In fact, you might want to put it in the chat box.
I will.
Totalengagementconsulting.com. And there's one of the tags at top is blogs, and you can, you know, click on, if you go on the blog, you can put in the search bar, you can put any kind of topic and see what comes up. So I also wrote, you know, 5 things to never say to a Hispanic, you know, 5 things to never say to a gay person. It's a real fun series.
We're almost at the bottom of the hour. So Randy, I'll do the bottom of the hour, then we can pivot. Are you good with that, buddy?
You read my mind. I know it's not difficult to do, Teddy, but you know, I think one thought at a time. So you got it.
You're not wearing your foil hat today, so it's good. Hey, I'm Teddy Burriss. This is my good friend Randy Wooden. You're at Lunch Conversations with Randy and Teddy, and Stan Kimmer. Excuse me, yep. Stan Kimmer. I got to remember that. Stan Kimmer is our special guest. The conversation's all about, you know, diversity and inclusion, and specifically in regards to workforce and you in your job search.
Yeah. So now we've got a couple topics we want to hit here.
Right.
If I'm a job hunter.
Yep.
And this topic of diversity is important to me, what are some indicators as I go through that interview and the hiring process that tells me, you know what, these guys are legit. They really back up what they say, or you know what, something ain't right here, and I better do some thinking before I sign on the dotted line. What are some indicators from a job hunter standpoint that you can share with our folks here?
You know, the first thing is, you know, before you even go into the interview, is look at the the website of the company, including their job site. You know, do you see images of diverse people, old and young, you know, Black, Hispanic, and white, male and female? You know, what is the aura they give up? What is their brand messaging from their overall website in terms of their diversity messaging? Look to make sure that their equal opportunity or non-discrimination statement is very easy to find. That it's, you know, it's pretty forward up there. Look to see the diversity of the senior leadership team, you know, their board of directors, and they usually profile their board of directors and their senior leadership. See if they have like an awards page. A lot of companies will show, you know, good place for working mothers, you know, best employer for Hispanic people. So look to see, you know, what kind of diversity awards that they've received. And then see if there's some kind of statement like from the CEO or president or a senior leader, you know, either a written statement or a little video where they talk about the importance of diversity. So that's and then you know, and then when you go in, you know, to the interview, you could actually, you know, ask, you know, what kind of diversity initiatives are you doing in your company? Do you have a diversity and inclusion strategy?
Okay. And also many of our attendees are white males, and many of them are older than 40. Not all, but many are. So one of our viewers asked, are there any tips you could give to an older white male who's searching for a job? Yeah.
And actually, you know, one thing is to, you know, look on the AARP website. They actually have a number of employers who've taken the generational diversity pledge. they've actually signed up and committed that we're going to give, fair shake to more mature job seekers. And so you can go on there and you'll probably have a better chance with those companies. And you can even reference, hey, when you apply, I see that you've signed the AARP pledge. Consider mature workers. And then when you interview, share the values that you bring as a mature worker, your expertise, your knowledge, and really sell yourself and share that, hey, most successful businesses know how to have an equal mix of older, younger, and middle-aged employees all working together, and that you can bring that value, as a mature worker, and, really sell, that positive aspect of yourself. Don't go in apologetically or with this negative thought that, oh gosh, I'm going to face job discrimination, but go in with this positive attitude that, I'm proud of being a mature worker and I have a lot to offer.
And
even though, and also, be enthusiastic and passionate. I'm 65 years old and I still have companies that are seeking me out and, want to bring me in as a trainer or even give me job offers. So, it can be done.
Hey, Teddy, there's hope for us yet.
I know, buddy. I know one day it'll happen. Okay. By the way, I can't go get another job. If I go work for someone else, my wife's going to kick me out of the house because I work for her. So here's one, Stan. Jessica brought this up. Jessica said, often, and I'm paraphrasing Jessica, bringing up diversity and inclusion issues in the office will often become painful HR torture. So what would you, it's a high level, what would you suggest an employee do who wants to address those types of challenges?
Well, first of all, get somebody exciting to come in. I feel so sad when someone says, oh, we had a diversity trainer come in and it was like the most boring 3 hours I had to sit through. You need to get someone in where people walk away and like, that was a cool 2 hours. I really learned a lot. And also approach it for the business value of embracing diversity. That we're not just talking about this because, we have to avoid stepping on each other's toes, but that if you leverage diversity properly, we can succeed and be better at what we're doing. So always bring forward that positivity and that business case of the value and the importance of diversity.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, let's pivot here a bit and look at it from the employer standpoint. The company says we value diversity, et cetera, and that's all well and good. So I'm the employer now. What are some tips you could provide for these hiring managers and employers to make sure they're saying the right things, doing the right things, and avoiding some terminology that could be deemed offensive?
And that's the whole topic of diversity recruiting and inclusive recruiting, which I also do workshops and love to teach about this. And of course, having some training on unconscious bias and realizing that as a single person interviewing, there's always going to be affinity bias. If you went to the same school that I went to.
Define that, Stan. Infinity bias, please.
Affinity bias is just our natural inclination that we will resonate and get along with people who have similarities to us.
Okay.
So for example, oh, Randy, you went to Georgia Tech like I did. I'm going to give you some bonus points in the interview. Or Teddy, you're a big figure skating fan like me. We find these things in common. And then what happens is I kind of like give you some advantage in the interviewing. And I might even be a little bit easier on you in the tough questions. So I kind of give you a free pass instead of being totally objective and really looking at the skills and what you have to offer. And usually what's important is having interviewing managers have a good, solid unconscious bias training. So they're trained to actually look at the qualifications of the person and then not relying on one person to make the decision. I think it's really important to have a diverse interview team and a diverse interviewing panel, because if you have 4 diverse people, interviewing a candidate, when you get down to that final selection, they're going to be looking at the candidate through different lenses. And then you can all come together and talk about the person's strengths or weaknesses, and not just let one person's biases kind of determine if this person is going to get the job offer or not.
Do you find you get that paralysis by analysis when you have too many cooks cooking the stew, or whatever that term, too many chefs spoil the soup, or whatever that's called? What is that called?
And actually a good way of handling that is to have like a rubric, is have like a diverse team put together. What are things that we want to make sure we cover in the interviews in terms of key skills we want the person to have, and kind of evaluate together against some kind of rubric, and not just kind of letting it be a group where we all just kind of talk and share our feelings about someone, but making it a little bit more structured. And you don't need to have 20 people maybe interview the person, but doing with 4 or 5 diverse people, that's a small enough group where I think you can get some pretty good solid feel for the qualifications of someone.
So,
Teddy.
Let me throw out a question that Dean brought up, Stan, and probably can't get too deep in the answer because it can get very deep. But if you're interviewing in a company and you feel like you were ushered out of the interview too quickly, if you feel like you have been discriminated against, there's a lot of answers to that. Some of them may be worth doing, and some may not do them. What are your thoughts?
Yes, and the thing, it's hard to put your finger on, because it could be the person was having a bad day, and they're having a bad day, and they didn't want to be interviewing anyone, and they just kind of got rid of you real quickly, or it could be they had a real legitimate thing that, okay, they're looking for particular requirements that you simply did not have, or there's like 10 requirements that they had, and you met 8 of them, but maybe the most important one is one of the ones that you didn't have. So you don't know if it could be skill-based. It could be, this is sad to say, they've already made up their mind who they're hiring, and they're just going through the motions. Yeah. So it's not discrimination, or it could be discrimination. That person, could have said, oh gosh, I just don't like Asians. I've had a bad experience with them, goodbye. But see, because it could be any of those multiple reasons, it's very, very hard, to prove or show that you were actually discriminated against.
Interesting. Stan, when we talked on the phone a month or 2 back, there are certain, you went through a little bit on some terminology that people may inadvertently just say that could be deemed offensive to the recipient, and not even realize that we're saying it, but how it is received could be very impactful in a negative way. So could you share some of those thoughts? What are some things that people might say, not out of malice, just either ignorance or just not being up to date on what's going on there?
That can come in several different flavors. First of all, there's like, using the appropriate words or terms, around somebody. And like a real extreme example, and this actually happened with a client, is an older white man who called everybody under 30 boy. Mm-hmm. And he said, oh, and so a young black man walks in, hello, hey boy, you can sit here. That's very offensive to black men, given, the history of slavery, in the US. Actually, if there could be a situation where, you use the wrong pronoun with somebody, that somebody might be gender non-binary, or they might be going through gender transition, and you can't tell if they're male or female, and you call them ma'am or sir, when they're neither. Another one is using the term sexual preference in talking about gay people. That's used by the far right to say that being gay is a choice that you make, whereas 99.9% of LGBT people believe that being gay is part of our being, that we were created gay, we've always been gay, we didn't choose to be gay. So accidentally using the term sexual preference could turn people off.
What term would be appropriate in that case?
Sexual orientation.
Sexual orientation. What about the difference between Black and African American?
That's a good one.
I've heard it on the show today several times. In some cases, African American. Otherwise, you say Black.
That's a really good one. There's been a survey that was done with African Americans, asking them, do you prefer Black or African American, or it doesn't matter? 2/3 said it doesn't matter. And then of the remaining 1/3, exactly half said they prefer Black, and the other half of the other third said they prefer African American.
With either way.
And also, there are a little bit of differences because, African American would not include maybe a Black person who recently came here from Africa. They're not American yet. They might be visiting. They might be like an intern or visiting. They might be here on assignment, working 3 years from your office in Kenya, and they're not really African American. They're a Black person. Yeah. And so there are, a few differences there. And actually the best thing to do is use the term that the person themselves uses to define themselves. So, treat people with respect by calling them, the label that they put on themselves and as they self-identify.
I want to come back to Dean's question, only to share with Dean that Rhonda dropped a statement in there for Dean. If you feel like you've been discriminated against in the process of job search, and if you really feel that it's urgent to make someone aware of it, then go file an EEOC claim is the first step. So that would be my only statement of legal guidance. And that's as far as I can go with that.
You're a doctor, Teddy. You're not an attorney.
Yeah, but I do math.
You're not even a doctor.
But I do math. So
yeah. Got another one. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Got another one for you. I never owned slaves. I've never done this. You hear that and you go, well, right. I think a lot of times we look at life and look at it as a zero-sum game.
Right.
And if you get this, that means I don't get that. If you get hired because of your ethnicity or other factors, therefore I lose out. So how do you address that concern that some would look at this as a zero-sum game and they say, hey, it wasn't my fault you are who you are, right? Yeah. That's your fault, or that's your decision, or that's whatever, and why should I be penalized for it?
Yeah, I love that question.
That concern.
I love that question because two things. Number one is that if we all, I don't believe the zero-sum game is like a fallacy that, if we all build our skills and work together, we can all thrive and our country will grow and there'll be more opportunity for all. And that's why, that we should all try to raise up everybody, and then we'll be a better nation and there'll be more opportunity. The second thing is historically, if you look, at the past, there has been some, white advantage. And most business leaders were white. Now we see many more Black, Hispanic, Asian people developing excellent skills and being fully competitive. And so the message is, this is a good thing, because the more we have well-educated, very professional, skilled people of color, that means I need to continue to grow my skills so I can equally compete.
Yeah, you gotta keep up.
If a white person kind of says that to me, I say, why don't you look at your own skills and see, are you growing and building more skills and making yourself more professional so that you can compete better against this new talent that's now coming through the pipeline? It's exciting for all of us that it's gonna challenge us. Like, I love, if I compete against an athlete who's much stronger than me, it's going to encourage me to even practice harder and to build even stronger skills so I can compete better.
Which is why every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I get up early and work out.
Yeah.
Back at you, Randy.
Hey, Teddy, look, we're about quarter till. So this is usually when we ask our guests to summarize. But if you have a quick question or any other comment you want to toss in there, Teddy, from the chat box, let's go ahead and do that. Otherwise, we'll move on to our next little section here.
Yeah, lots of questions.
Lots of comments, yeah.
And, I've heard this question twice. I saw it in some context twice. And this is directly to Stan, is it important to present the topic of privilege before introducing DEI training?
Uh, I like to note it should come a little bit later in the training, because what you want to do is, if you walk in the room and the first 2 minutes you yell privilege, racism, people just shut down.
Yeah.
So that's why I always start with the exercise of, let's all look at what is diversity as a whole. And I do an exercise of every single person in the room thinking about their aspects of diversity, and emphasizing that this discussion is about all of us are in this together. And you want to start in a positive note. If you start on the positive value of diversity, and that every one of us is a part of the diversity mix and bring something valuable to the table, and get everybody on that same page, that makes it easier to have the tough discussions.
It does, and that's Stan. That's a good bit why I found your presentation a bit different from most, is that you didn't start out with that, and so for that I'm thankful, and also it helped open the mind a little bit to be more receptive to what you had to say later on. So we're going to pivot now. In this part of the show, we always ask our guests. We have Stan Kimmer on here. Stan is with Total Engagement Consulting, 30 plus years at IBM. This guy knows what he's talking about. So let me ask you this, Stan. Listen, we've had 45 minutes here already. If you had to summarize, and what are the takeaways that you want our viewers to have?
I think the main takeaways are that the whole discussion around diversity, equity, and inclusion is becoming increasingly important, in all aspects of society, and especially in the business world, nonprofit, and the government world, that we really need to focus on it strategically, that we need to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion for any organization to be relevant and thrive in this fast-changing, growingly diverse world. And secondly, there's that every single person is a valuable part of this diversity mix, and that every single person has their own very complex mix of diversity attributes, and that we need to truly respect and value, every single diverse person, because when we value each other and work together, much more can be accomplished.
Yeah.
Gotcha. There's another question that just popped up, and I think it could be appropriate to ask the difference between diversity and affirmative action. Is there a difference there? And during the interview, how can I tell if the company manages these?
An affirmative action is actually a tactic or a program of how you can execute diversity. Mm-hmm. And so, diversity is the entire topic of all of our unique differences and working together and valuing these differences. And then when you look at diversity, the next step after talking about the diversity strategy is, what do companies need to do and execute to actually implement diversity in terms of their marketing campaigns and their sales strategy, and how they do diversity recruiting and whatever diversity training they do. An affirmative action basically is a program that says we need to make sure that the systems that might be, that are kind of managed by a majority group of people need to have some kind of programs in place so that everybody has a fair opportunity to compete and get the jobs. And it actually encourages companies, it's not about a quota system, but it's encouraging companies that they should really look at their metrics and see what's going on. So for example, if I know that 60% of people coming out of schools with accounting degrees are men, and that 25% are people of color, and I interview 60% are men and 25% people of color, I should look at, who am I hiring? And if I'm hiring 100% men, I need to take a hard look and say, what's going on here? Do we have systemic things built into our system, biases, unconscious biases, and we might not even be doing it intentionally, favoring men. So it's putting safeguards in place to make sure that we really are providing an equal chance for people to be considered based on their skills.
Yeah, I even remember reading, gosh, it's been months ago, as it relates to how companies advertise their job openings and the places where they advertise them. Some of the actual verbiage that's contained within the job description and the qualifications will either encourage or discourage certain populations from applying. I don't know the science behind that. I don't even remember where I read it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. So for example, this is a generalization and it is kind of a stereotype, but
Sure.
it does follow along this lines. If you have a job posting that says 10 requirements of the job are, men, we generally are a little bit more loosey-goosey. Hey, I got 7 of the 10, I'm going to apply. Women will take that much more literally, generally. Not all women, but generally women will say, gosh, if I don't have all 10, I'm not going to apply. So you need to use language like preferred requirements include to open up the amateur of the job thing. Having GPA requirements. Someone who's grown up economically disadvantaged and had like work full time while going to school and maybe got a 2.8 might be a much better employee than someone whose parents paid their whole way through school and they didn't have to work and got a 3.1. So having things like, you must have a 3.0 can also weed out, minority candidates. So there's things like that that can discourage people from applying. I also feel that it is wrong to have words like, specifically looking for, an African American for this position, because what you'd want to do is you don't want to weed out all qualified candidates. The purpose of inclusive recruiting is to have the widest possible net of talent across all diversity, and then have a system where everybody is given a fair chance in their interviewing process so that you can truly find the right person.
Stan, let's face it.
If you do that right, you'll build diversity.
Stan, that, and that sounds great. And, the devil's in the details, but thankfully for guys like you that are out there trying to educate folks on realizing their biases, their stereotypes, and even how companies word the job. I mean, that's totally benign. There was no thought given to that. It was just, there no malice, no harm. But as you can look back and now you can make the case that, this is probably precluding some of the female population. So I think it's a journey that we go through. And I say this every week, life's a journey and you learn as you go. A lot of chapters out there. Stan, thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it. You've shed some light on some interesting topics. We've had really good conversation on the chat box.
Yep.
And so let's turn it. I'll start, Teddy, and I'll share a story or two or
Got one, buddy? You ready?
quick one. And then I'll throw it to you and you can share one and then take us home with our next week's guest. I don't know if I ever shared this. I know I've shared this inside of Goodwill. I don't know if I ever shared this on one of our shows, but as a young hiring official I won't even mention the company, nor the people involved, but I was a hiring official at probably age 23 or 4. And or 25 or whatever. And we just had young kids and I was the primary earner in our family. And it was up to me to hire a part-time person. And I found a Black or African-American woman, all right, who I felt fit the bill and basically, offered her the job. And I've said this, and it's one of those life lessons I learned early on. My coworkers, everybody was white and most were older than I and mostly male, I think. They went to the owner of the company and said, we don't want this blankety blank person working here because they won't fit in, and all that, right? So the owner came to me and basically said, it's either you or her. Either you figure out a way to have her not show up here or you don't work here. What are you going to do?
Wow.
And here again, young guy, twin sons, not making much money. I was scared to death. And so I had to call her and tell her that we had changed our mind and weren't going to hire anybody after all. And I was scared. And ultimately, I did what I had to do to preserve myself.
Yeah.
Had I had the financial wherewithal or other avenues, I would have basically said,
Yep.
and moved on with life, but I didn't. And I've always, and that's been, I don't know, what, 40 years ago, 35 years ago. I've thought about that often as I coach applicants who I know are qualified to do the work, and whether it's race or in a lot of cases now it's age or whatever, and they walk away shaking their head, go, I just don't get it. I don't get it. And sometimes you never know what hits you, but I've always tried to keep that in mind ever since I didn't have the courage to tell the truth and to do the right thing. So I always vowed not to do that again when it came to hiring. I don't hire a ton of guys, but I think had I not, I don't know, if I hadn't run into that situation back then, maybe my life would have been different. I don't know, but it really opened my eyes at an early age to some of the poo that people go through, and often don't know what hit them. She had no idea that it was her race and only her race that prevented her from going to work. And I was the guy the hatchet man that had to do that. So it's not that I'm proud of it at all, but I think it was a learning lesson for me. And I've hoped to instill that in others that I've interacted with. So I'll get off the whatever soapbox for a while, throw it over to Teddy. Teddy, take us home.
Well, I'm going to add to that, Randy, because years later, I took a job and I worked for a guy who was blatantly didn't care about diversity, didn't care about inclusion. And I'm saying that in a very what's the phrase, a politically correct way. This guy was, in my words, very ugly in the context of people who were different than him. And he used to say a phrase that I won't repeat here. It wasn't an ugly phrase, but it was a marker for me. Every time I heard him say this phrase, he was basically saying, hey, that's my opinion and you have to accept it. And when I finally caught on to what he was saying, that's when I put my foot down. I was, 45 years old at this point, and I'd learned, it took 45 years for me to learn, but I learned that, discrimination, hate, bigotry, mix it up all you want to mix it up is unacceptable. And so my first line I wrote here for my statement is the acceptance of that discrimination is failure. We cannot accept, we cannot tolerate it. And so therefore, we're in this mode of learning how to be better humans. And part of that is diversity and inclusion, development and growth. The other thing I wrote down is ask yourself this. A couple of questions that popped up and said, hey, what do I do if I feel like I've been discriminated against, or if I feel like the company doesn't believe truly what they say on their website, they're not truly as diverse as they feel they are. I would ask you to ask yourself this question: do I want to work there?
Yeah.
And if you feel like you've been discriminated, I'm telling you right now, move on. I can tell you personal experience in my business. I went to do a proposal for a company and I discovered how ugly they are. And I'm using, again, public words, how ugly they are. And I was obligated to give them a proposal, obligated, because they paid me to produce a plan. So I took and produced the plan, and they wanted me to put into the proposal what it would take for me to do the work. I was obligated to give it to them. Randy, I did, the times 1,000 number, I gave them a price that they were never going to pay because I did not want that job. Now, what I should have said was, I will not work for you because I believe you're an ugly organization, in maybe more professional words. Ask yourself, do you really want to work there? Here's the other one. And this is something I'm trying to be better at. And Stan, thanks for coming and giving me ideas. And we've had other people. You probably know Val Boston III. He's been on that show.
Oh, I love Val. He's one of my mentors.
Yeah, I mean, all you guys stir me up and get me thinking differently. And one of the things that I've discovered for myself, and I hope others will discover, is this: build a better world through your example.
Yeah.
Build a better world through your example. And part of that is to learn to respect our differences. Hey, thanks for letting me share that. Here's our next week, which is March 3rd, Randy.
Woohoo!
We have Dave and Dara Feldman. Dave and his wife, Dara, they're coming on. And the conversation is going to be about crafting a career with character. Now, they have a business, and the business is called Virtues Matter. They have an app on their iPhone. I'm going to encourage you to check that out. But it's going to be a great conversation about virtues and creating a career journey through your character. So I hope all of you can show up and join us next week. Thanks a lot for everybody who showed up. Another a great record of fantastic attendees and another fabulous special guest. Stan, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.
All right, Teddy, good job. Stan, thanks for coming out today. Again, we'll see you next week. Have a great rest of the week, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.